Hello and welcome back to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, and with me this week, as ever, we have Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And very excited to have returning guest, stand-up comedian and co-host of Triggernometry, Francis Foster.
Hello, mate. Lovely to be here.
Thanks for coming. Coming up on today's show, we've got plenty to discuss. We'll be talking about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, Gareth Southgate's culture war against England fans, and the ban on puberty blockers. Before we kick off, I just wanted to remind everyone that Spiked is funded by you. So if you want to support us, you can very easily by just going to spiked-online.com/support.
Give them money.
Let's do it. Just £5 or more a month. That's all we're asking for. And then you can get some really great perks in return. Just follow that link, spiked-online.com/support.
Do you know what I find really interesting, right, is the different way that the Brits do that and the Americans.
Mm.
So you do it to the British, you're like, oh, well, you know, you get all these things and please support.
Yeah.
Americans are like, pay for the show, dickhead. You like it, you watch it, give me money.
We need to learn some of that. I think we've got a bit of reticence.
We've been a bit too soft on these people.
Shake them down.
I always said you boys were right wing.
Right, so let's discuss what is probably going to be the defining moment of this presidential election campaign, maybe even one of the biggest news stories of the century so far. Who knows? We're, of course, talking about this weekend's shooting of Donald Trump. Tom, I mean, what have you made about the shooting and the aftermath to it now that we're nearly a week on from it?
And as you say, like one of the biggest stories of the century so far, and also it could have been so much bigger because of how close that bullet came to killing him. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. If it wasn't for a turn of the head, you know, we could be in a completely different timeline now in so many respects. There's so many facts about the case itself which are alarming and fascinating. How this was allowed to happen, how the shooter was able to be on this flat roof with a kind of clear sight, not that far away from the stage itself. The pile-up of security failures which are slowly emerging, whether that's the fact that people from the audience were pointing out to police and Secret Service that someone was up there. There's even more recently been suggestions that they were trying to track him down for about 20 minutes before he actually opened fire. So all of that will be discussed and reckoned with in the process. But it was interesting seeing the immediate reaction and the reaction in the days since, which has been an interesting mix of obviously some of the usual suspects on the Democratic side who have either kind of low-key luxuriated in what is a horrendous attempt at political violence and murder, which has been very dispiriting. Or there's been this attempt at victim blaming as well. There have been articles, as there was one in Sky News, they've changed the headline now, but it was something of the effect of course, political violence is horrible, but has he created a climate that has changed the rules of engagement or something?
Always ignore the words before but.
Yeah.
My favourite thing was John Sopel, formerly of the BBC, did this. Also, a few of the usual suspects on liberal American media were criticising Trump because of the fact that he had that moment of defiance. He stood up, put his fist in the air and said, fight, fight. They chided him for that, to say that this isn't the kind of rhetoric that we need at a time like this. He just barely escaped with his life. So that's been really fascinating. And also, I think a lack of appreciation of, if you're going to really go around, if you're going to go down that line of suggesting that rhetoric has brought us to this point, surely you should be looking in the mirror and at the years-long demonisation of this candidate, not just as someone you disagree with or someone you think is wrong-headed or a bit authoritarian, but as literally Hitler. Yeah, as we saw on the front cover of the New Republic recently. But again, this is just the levels of hypocrisy and also self-delusion on the part of the American liberal media never ceases to amaze me.
Definitely. And you know, President Biden has come out and given a few speeches saying, you know, we need to turn down the temperature. The rhetoric is getting too heated. But in a way, that's actually, they're pointing that at Donald Trump and the Republicans, aren't they? Because they're still calling him Hitler, still calling him a fascist. If not Trump, they're now calling J.D. Vance, his vice presidential pick, a fascist. So, you know, we're not going to see actually a dialing down of rhetoric at all, are we?
No, and that's the worrying thing. You know, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I woke up on Sunday morning, picked up my phone, saw what was happening, saw that he hadn't been injured, breathed a sigh of relief because I went, well, at least the Euro finals aren't going to be ruined now. Because, look, and it was genuinely what I thought, but I think there's something far deeper about that kind of almost flippant comment, which is it has now infected everything, that this idea of, you know, this person is a fascist, this person is evil, this person is And to the point, it takes over everything, and we're not actually having a discussion about the things that are important, which is policies. What does America actually need to do in order to move forward?
Yeah.
How do they need to heal? What do they do with the border? What do they do with the fentanyl crisis? All this talking about fascism and, he's like Hitler, it is utterly inane and puerile when you consider the very real problems America has internally, and let's not even talk about externally, where you've got the war with Russia.
Yeah.
You've got the Chinese giving a little side eye to Taiwan, and what happens in America very much dictates what other people do outside of America. And then you've got the deficit. Why is no one talking about this $1 trillion deficit? So instead, what's happened is we've created this narrative which has stoked the fires of division, resentment, anger, using words like fascist, which I reckon if you asked Joe Biden what fascist meant, he wouldn't be able to tell you. And partly that's because of the condition he's in. I'm like, genuinely, like, if you ask him, what would you actually get out of Joe Biden? He thought Vladimir Zelensky was Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
And that's not even a joke.
He thought Kamala Harris was Trump as well. The rhetoric thing is fascinating, because it is worth stressing that the attempt to pin this on Joe Biden, because he used the phrase "put a bullseye on Trump," or to suggest that anyone else other than the shooter is in any way responsible for this, is obviously wrong-headed, liberal. There's been some grim kind of cancellations of people who have just got on social media and sounded off about this, saying unpleasant things, certainly, but not something they should lose a job over. But at the same time, I'm just struck by that hypocrisy, by the fact that there's always this reflex in the midst of sometimes horrendous acts of violence or flare-ups, which aren't particularly political at all, to pin it on the populists or to pin it on the Republican side. And yet this time around, in the context of even from the President of the United States going around and saying that Trump and the MAGA extremists are semi-fascist and constantly making these allusions to the 1930s. And then we all know what the Nazi slur does. It just suggests that person is so beyond the pale that they're kind of fair game. And whilst the vast majority of people are not going to act on that, of course, and anyone who does, that's still their responsibility. Of course, it does create a sort of climate in which you might have some deranged individuals who might reach for that script and have a pop. So, but it's just, like I say, it's the hypocrisy between the two sides, which is always so striking.
And it also speaks to a lack of education. Where, again, I reckon if you ask most people who are screaming at Donald Trump about being a fascist, could you please explain to me what fascism actually is?
Yeah.
What is the political ideology of fascism? What is it? What is its goals? Whatever else. Because what's really ironic is the people who were talking about, vaccine mandates, people losing their jobs, their livelihoods, not being able to enter certain places if you didn't get the vaccine. That's pretty fascist.
Or generally, there seems to be like an authoritarianism on both sides, but fascist and authoritarian are not, they're not interchangeable. Fascist doesn't just mean right wing. It seems to mean almost or anti-immigration or things like that. It just seems to be sort of anyone who is, to the left of Joe Biden, to the right of Joe Biden, suddenly becomes this fascist or semi-fascist, as he calls it. It's a complete sort of debasing of political language. I mean, you could say Trump does the same. He goes around calling Biden a Marxist and a communist. Equally ludicrous. But I'm not sure. It's certainly not sustained at the same level. He doesn't have the backing of the mainstream media to go around calling Biden a crazed, communist and Maoist. Or he has used all these words. It's unbelievable. But yeah,
it's the ability of people who, in quote marks, should know better.
Yeah.
And they often don't know better. But, people who are university professors, people who are leader writers at national American newspapers, some of whom were, you saw some quite prominent, supposedly respectable people indulging in the conspiracy theory that the shooting was staged.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't just a few no-name accounts on Twitter. There were some quite prominent people thinking, this looks a little bit fishy. And it's telling that when you have that kind of conspiratorial thing going on in America, that the kind of extremes of rhetoric, on the Democratic side, it's very much within the establishment itself. It's not a fringe thing which is shouting from the sidelines and making a lot of noise. It actually has much more significant consequences, I think, because they're in genuine positions of influence and power, these people.
Definitely.
And I think it also reminds us here in the UK that there's this image of looking at America, and we understand that it's a different country, but not really. It is a completely different culture. It's a completely different culture, way of seeing the world, different foundational myths. You can see that in something like what happened to Trump. What do we do here? We milkshake Farage. It's completely a different thing. They're far more extreme in the way that they view the world, in the way that they behave, in the way that they implement things. It's just really interesting because here we're just temperamentally far more moderate compared to what happens over there.
The culture war has guns over there, I guess, or has a sort of violence behind it in a way that it doesn't here. Tom, I did want to talk briefly about Trump's vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance. Very fascinating figure to say nothing else of him.
I mean, if you just compare the level of commentary and media discussion that's generated, even in the UK, in comparison to when he picked Pence back in, the run up to 2016, I think you can tell that this is quite a striking pick. I mean, this, I think, is an example of essentially him selecting someone who is really going to give some substance to whatever Trumpism or this new phase of right-wing American populism is. And it's very much in the direction of trying to marry a kind of social conservatism, skepticism about mass immigration, skepticism about American military interventions abroad and so on, with a much more pro-Labour, pro-working class kind of economic and political offer in general. J.D. Vance, along with a few others, Josh Hawley, also in the Senate, have been really at the forefront of trying to carve out that new kind of politics. We also saw reflected at the convention this week when you had the head of the Teamsters Union addressing the crowd. They're not endorsing the Republicans, not endorsing Trump, but praising Hawley and Vance, incidentally. And I think there's a clear kind of analysis there, which is that if Trumpism is to continue on after Trump, or if American populism on the right is going to be able to really develop in the wake of Trump being the kind of wrecking ball, but then what do you build in his place, if you see what I mean? Then he is the one who signals a desire to do that, if you see what I mean. And whilst people will, he's obviously having all the usual sort of smears thrown at him, the things that, we would want to criticise him about. But I think a lot of the histrionic response to him as that selection is because I think a lot of people, particularly on the Democratic side, know what a potent offer that selection of kind of social conservatism with a slightly more old Labour politics could represent in the elections going forward.
I mean, imagine having pro-workers' rights policies, but without the trans traitors. That does seem like a fairly straightforward offer that any party could take up if they really wanted to win, but
no,
they don't want to.
No, trans women are women, you bigot. Shut your face. No, it's a very profound point. But it goes back to what I was saying, which is we talk about the superficial, we talk about the histrionics, we talk about the rhetoric. We don't actually talk about the very real and serious problems our societies and our culture faces. And when you have politicians who don't do that, then how are we going to solve the problems? How are we going to solve the problems that we have, which are very real, which are, in my opinion, civilizational in their nature? But we don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what I want from every single candidate are people who are just going to come out and go, look, these are the problems, these are the issues. This is my policy in order to solve X problem. And I think people now are so desperate that they will vote for people that they would never have conceivably voted for 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't think Trump would have stood a chance of getting elected 20 years ago. I don't think Farage would have stood a chance of getting elected 20 years ago. But the reality is the democratic system is failing ordinary people to the point where they feel that they have no choice but to select these candidates. Mm-hmm. And that isn't the fault of Farage, and it's not the fault of Trump. It is the fault of the system, and it's the fault of the people within the system continually lying and letting down ordinary people.
Definitely. And I think, thinking about the sort of incumbents and the establishment, let's talk a little bit about Joe Biden, who is ill with COVID as we speak.
Just with COVID?
Let's find out. But there's pressure on him. He did seem to have a bit of a reprieve for a couple of days at least.
I think it would have been so weird to swap him out immediately afterwards.
But the pressure on him is building once again. He suggested that if an illness were to emerge, he could be persuaded to step down. Mm-hmm. Tom, what have you made of that side of things on the Democratic side?
I think anything could happen really now where Biden is concerned because they don't have any good options, really. I mean, can you really put against Trump, particularly after the kind of heroics of that, surviving that assassination attempt. And you can really put Trump now up against Biden and not expect a complete drubbing. You look at the polls at the moment. I mean, Trump is not only winning just about nationally, but in all the key swing states by a good few points. Obviously, the most straightforward person to swap him out for is Vice President Kamala Harris, who is incredibly even less popular, even less popular than the walking corpse who is her boss. So it's the sort of thing where you think there's no good options here, which is why it's in a bit of a holding pattern. So we have seen these senior Democrats basically call for him to go, some behind closed doors, some more publicly. I could well see a situation in which by the time people watch and listen to this, he's gone. Yeah. But at the same time, it could be to be replaced by a candidate who would lose by even greater a margin. So there's no good answers for them.
This episode of the Spike podcast is brought to you by Shopify. One of the best ways to become truly free is to start your own business. Imagine finally living life on your terms. But getting started is always more difficult than it sounds. Luckily, there's a way to make that independence simple, and it sounds like this. Yes, that's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the groundbreaking all-in-one commerce platform that helps you become your own boss. Shopify supports up-and-coming business owners like you all over the world. Whether you trade in second-hand cars or electric guitars, Shopify can streamline how you sell goods both online and in-store. Turning your big idea into a real company has never been so hassle-free. Shopify brings your entire business under one online dashboard. In practice, this just means that all of your everyday tasks, from shipping goods to taking payments, can be managed from one simple location, giving you more time to focus on growing your business. Shopify also launches your venture on all those vital social media marketplaces from X to TikTok. So whoever you're trying to connect with, Shopify will help you reach them. Shopify also puts you at the center of your business. Its extensive tools will help you constantly adapt your image, and Shopify's business courses will help you take your company in new directions. Whatever your goals are, Shopify will help you achieve them. So if you're ready to break from your 9 to 5, get Shopify today. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked to take your business to the next level. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. So, Gareth Southgate has resigned as England manager following the 2-1 defeat to Spain in the Euros final. Francis, Southgate is more than just a sporting figure. He's very much a cultural and political figure. That's why we want to talk about him on this podcast. He's got a bit of a reputation for actually diving in with both feet into the culture war.
Good. I like the little turn of phrase.
Good footballing turn of phrase.
Yeah.
Denouncing Brexit, implying very heavily that England fans are all racist. What have you made of his career on that side of things, particularly off the pitch?
Off the pitch, one thing I've actually been impressed by with Southgate is that he is under a tremendous amount of pressure and vitriol. And I don't think if people who will listen to this around the world and people who aren't football fans realise just if England aren't doing well, we look at the England manager as if he's worse than a paedophile. We just look at him and you're going, this is terrible, and you're doing this deliberately. We lose all sense of perspective when it comes to when it comes to this person. One thing that I will have to say about Southgate is I found him actually on the whole to be a unifying figure. I found, when he took over, we lost to Iceland.
Yeah.
In the 2016 Euros. It was humiliating and embarrassing. And we've actually got to a point where we're much better. We're doing really well. And he actually said something that I found really interesting when they asked him about politics in this Euros, because Kylian Mbappe, what a player Kylian Mbappe is, came out and denounced Marine Le Pen. And he said, and actually, to be fair to Mbappe, there's very good reasons for him to denounce Le Pen. But he denounced Le Pen. And they asked about Southgate. He actually said, what we have in the camp is a politics-free zone.
Yeah.
So I think he learned from his mistakes. He learned from his missteps. And I think at the end, he was politically neutral, which, if I'm honest, is what I want from sport.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think this Euros has felt less politicised generally, and I think Southgate has reined it in somewhat. But ahead of that, Tom, should we talk a bit about it just seemed that he was constantly antagonising the fans, not just for the boring play that gets people's backs up, but because of his pronouncements on culture war issues.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons it's easy to, because there has been this shift away from these supercharged culture war issues, that it's easy to forget just how willing a sort of protagonist in the culture war he was originally.
Yeah,
there's even things that I'd forgotten about. So in the run-up to the 2018 World Cup, he was giving interviews, one of which in which he said that he was pontificating about Brexit, said, it's a pining for a world that no longer exists. And then in another interview with ITV for a documentary, he openly said that the Brexit vote had racial undertones. You think, this is the England manager, why are you coming out making these comments on this incredibly controversial issue? And then, of course, we saw in the wake of BLM, the knee taking, then when the fans go back into the stadiums because of COVID restrictions easing and you get the boos, he really doubles down at that moment. Yeah. He basically says, if you think we're going to stop doing this now, then then you've got another thing coming. The Dear England letter, which was obviously very well received by the great and good. But really the subliminal message of it is like, look, I know you don't like our lovely anti-racist politics, but you are wrong.
Yeah,
to show you, it was
you're on the losing side. It was how he addressed,
and it was obviously presented as people sending racist messages, something that, and all the But I think the problem is that there was this attempt to present any bristling against the knee taking and the virtue signalling as the equivalent of sending someone a horrendous racist message, and also the last Euros, the whole moral panic about racist England fans that happened afterwards. This was something that he was also very much involved in. I mean, at the end of the day, obviously, it was horrendous after that final when Rashford and Sancho and Saka got sent those horrendous racist messages. But it quickly got turned into not, that's awful, let's find who's responsible for it. But there's something rotten at the heart of English football fandom. It was completely breezed over the fact that the vast majority of it came from overseas, which no one talks about now. I think there were less than a dozen arrests in the UK itself.
Yeah.
And also, there was the whole Rashford mural moment where, of course, there's this mural of Marcus Rashford in Manchester, it gets defaced. This quickly goes around the internet and is just heavily presented or implied as this is obviously some sort of racist thing. Even though the police almost immediately say that they don't believe there's any racial motivation. And when the unblurred images of what the graffiti said, which was basically just a cock and balls and said "shine a bucket,"
shine a bucket, yeah.
And it was also in Manchester City light blue. Maybe suggests that the tribalism on display was actually more sporting than it was racial. So it was his willingness to kind of engage in all of that. But I think he did learn, but unfortunately from recognising the error of his ways, but I think it was because of the fact that particularly at Qatar, when at the point where they were, are you really going to engage in your virtue signalling if it means that you can't play? Because the Qataris aren't be very happy about that. The fact that they just flopped instantly, I think, made all of them realise it was probably not worth it to carry on going down.
I did want to talk a bit about that World Cup. Because that was, I think, that was where we had the sort of bonfire of the virtue signals, because suddenly, the
One Love armband.
If they, England were told, if you wear the pro LGBT armband, you'll get yellow carded. And they say, we won't wear it then.
That's what Martin Luther King would have done.
Yeah. And, there was this, even Southgate himself, actually, when he was asked about the condition of migrant workers there, he said, well, they would have loved to have been there. They love it. They're excited about the football when they're talking about people who died. So it's like that sort of, it's easy to posture against English football fans, very difficult to posture against a very powerful petro state.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's paying a hell of a lot of money and lining everybody's pockets in order to go over there. I think what people realise pretty quickly is that politics is complicated. Yeah. And actually the Michael Jordan approach, when asked if he was going to criticise conservatives in the 1990s, and he went, no, because conservatives buy sneakers too. Yeah. And you can go, well, that's quite a cynical approach, but actually it's a very intelligent approach, because unless you are a political figure, unless you want to become a political figure, unless you have the knowledge to do that, then what you're doing is exposing yourself to a whole raft of criticism that actually, if you're sensible, you can avoid. A classic example of this is Jordan Henderson. So Jordan Henderson, England footballer, great player, won the Champions League, Liverpool captain, great servant for England and Liverpool. At the end of his career, it was pretty much made clear to him by the manager he was no longer a first teamer. We're going to bring in newer, younger, fresher players. You're not going to be a regular. And he said to the manager, Klopp, that's fair enough. And I want to look elsewhere. Klopp went, okay, fine. Yeah. And he moved to go and play in the Saudi Arabian League. Mm. However, he'd come out as being very strongly LGBT, all the rest of it. And people were like, well, hang on a minute, mate.
Yeah.
So you're a staunch believer in gay rights. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Great. And then because someone's offered you a lot of money, you're going to abandon those principles and head over to Saudi Arabia. Which one is it?
Yeah.
And what he ended up doing was making himself look like a complete dickhead. Mm. When actually, if he'd just shut his mouth, he would have shed loads of cash, and no one would have cared.
Yeah, because no one has asked footballers to be political figures or to be role models. You know, we don't. Most football fans don't expect or want that from football players. Great if they have a passion about something, no one wants to stop them from airing that. But
and it's all I think everyone knows it's so phony as well. The Jordan Henderson thing was the perfect example of that. At the very least, they might genuinely think that they're being incredibly important and progressive and using the platform that they have and to all the usual cliches. But I remember when he gave that interview to The Athletic when he was kind of sort of his mea culpa, but explanations of what happened. He was like, you know, I really believe in this. You know, I put in the hard yards. I wore the rainbow laces. You just think, is that really what it means to be
and
an
by the way, somebody laced those boots for him.
So that was good. But I think at the very least it's been pushed back to a certain extent. But I think it's this weird relationship which has grown up though between the fans and the team is kind of interesting because obviously Southgate gets a lot of plaudits for making it fun to play for England again. And creating a sense of togetherness and getting the country behind the team, even in the face of some quite terrible, turgid football. But at the same time, the way in which he's done it by also appealing to these kind of cultural things, playing into these prejudices against football fans, it also created this level of hostility.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was really fascinating when you had, during the tournament, when England almost went out to Slovakia and then Jude Bellingham was saying, you know, obviously we're only a minute away from being kicked out of the tournament and you think, you're going to go home to all that rubbish, which means people criticising them for going out when they should have definitely progressed. And you think, okay, now almost any criticism of you is wrong-headed and probably driven by something that it shouldn't be. So, yes, it's, on the one hand, he kind of brought them together, but on the other hand, he also created this sort of distance between the team and the public because they were it got to the position where they would be demonised for criticising them for doing anything, whether it's virtue signalling or just playing terribly, which is a strange place to end up in.
Here's an interesting question I'll put to you both, see if you know the answer. You know who was instrumental, which footballer was instrumental in bringing the rainbow laces to the game, and actually and appeared, I think, in the promotional material for it?
I don't know.
Joey Barton.
The great progressive thinker of our time.
Yeah, I put my finger in his face when you're the problem, Joey. Have a think, mate.
Incredible. Our next sponsor today is AG1. We all know that staying healthy is important, but there's so much conflicting advice out there about how exactly we're supposed to do it. Taking care of yourself can often feel impossible. I used to feel that way too, before I started using AG1. AG1 is a daily nutritional supplement that makes it effortless to keep on top of your health. Just one scoop contains 70 high-quality ingredients, all designed to meet your baseline nutritional needs. Lately, I've been enjoying drinking AG1 with my morning coffee, and fitting it into my routine has been really simple. I just mix one scoop of AG1 powder with water, and in less than a minute, I have everything I need to get my day started. That's because AG1 contains a range of important ingredients. Niacin, for instance, has helped me drastically reduce tiredness and fatigue, and copper and chromium have helped unlock all the important nutrients in the meals I eat. But the most surprising benefit of AG1 is how it's been supporting my heart health. The thiamine and B vitamins in my single morning scoop have helped me feel stronger and less stressed, making a world of difference in my day-to-day life. This might all sound too good to be true, but AG1 is really one of the most trusted brands out there. That's why the likes of Olympians and F1 drivers trust their morning scoop. It really does make life that much easier. So if you want to replace your multivitamins and more, start with AG1 today. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription. Just go to drinkag1.com/spiked. That's drinkag1.com/spiked.
ag1.com/spiked. Check it out.
Whisper it, but has the Labour Party done something maybe a tiny little bit sensible? Beneath the headlines, we've been talking a lot about the King's Speech, or there's some planning reforms and things like that. But Wes Streeting has, the new Health Secretary, has extended the ban on puberty blockers, which a lot of people might not have expected from Labour. Tom, what have you made of this?
I mean, as you say, it's sensible. It's eminent common sense. They did say when the Cass Review first was published that they would honour its recommendations. Obviously, puberty blockers had already been banned in the NHS prior to the final report coming out. But as a consequence of the Cass Review and all of the evidence it laid out in relation to puberty blockers, in relation to their side effects, in relation to the complete lack of evidence for their efficacy for treating gender-confused children and so on, that seemed to really lay down a marker. The Tory party also banned them at private clinics as well, which was a really... Well, not only was a loophole, but also there's a lot of dodgy clinics who were operating on that basis. So to see them continue that is welcome. It is worth saying that of all the Labour front bench, I think Wes Streeting has been the most openly sort of gender critical. You're grading on a curve there, but still I think he's been quite outspoken. And, it's as ever, it's kind of giving with one hand and taking away with the other. In the King's Speech, we've also seen legislation talked about a trans-inclusive conversion therapy ban with some carve-outs, but nevertheless that could still be a big problem if you're looking to protect confused youngsters from this sort of ideology. But it is worth praising. I just think it's fascinating that the one praiseworthy thing they've done so far has led to Wes Streeting in particular being referred to as a self-hating gay man and a child killer.
Yeah.
So it tells you something about the activists set around him and around the Labour Party, that the one good thing they've done so far makes him tantamount to some sort of murderer.
Yeah, and
tellingly.
It is fascinating to see people on who consider themselves to be on the left essentially calling for completely unregulated use of pharma, experimental drugs to children, depending on just on the basis that they want them, and that's fine. What have you made of this, Ralph? Because Wes really has been, pulled over the coals for doing something sensible, for protecting children.
Well, I think what he shows is that he's sensible by and large, and he's willing to look at the facts, read the reports, take on board the report conducted by an eminent paediatrician, and then put the necessary guidelines in place and banning puberty blockers. Because if he didn't do that, what would happen is that years down the line, you're already going to see this, there is going to be a whole raft of lawsuits against the NHS, particularly the Tavistock, even though that's now closed. There are people who've had their lives and their bodies destroyed as a result of it. You're going to see a lot of it in the United States. So what he did was actually very smart and very intelligent. And one of the things that I'm really grateful for about this country is that when you go to the US, that is a left versus right issue.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that is so toxic. It's so toxic, and they have made it toxic. Both figures on the left and the right, may I say, have made it toxic. Whereas you come here, you have Rosie Duffield, you have J.K. Rowling, even though they think she's now a fascist, but before she was a darling of the left. You now have Wes Streeting, and you think, actually, that's why having as little toxicity in politics is so important. Because the moment you make something partisan, eventually all that happens is that you're never going to solve it. Because then it just becomes, well, we're going to disagree with it because you disagree with it, even though it actually might be the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, it is odd how, certain medical interventions have become partisan issues. You think about, your stance on the vaccine is usually an indicator of politics rather than, your actual view on medicine. Where you stand on puberty blockers is not... certainly for the people who are in favour of them, that's not because they have a good reading of the actual pharmacology. It's because
or any of the evidence.
Because even those hateful people oppose them. Therefore, I must be in favour.
Absolutely, because even this, he's killing trans kids by doing this, is based on a complete fallacy. So the claim that has been made in a kind of horrendous form of emotional blackmail, often uttered to parents while trying to work out what to do with their child who's going through some serious distress, is that you have to affirm them, you have to get them on the puberty blockers, you have to put them on the pathway to cross-sex hormones and all the rest of it, because do you want a trans kid or a dead kid, because they're going to commit suicide. It's also in the Cass Review, there is no evidence whatsoever to support that claim. In fact, there's some studies which are now coming out which suggest the opposite might be true, that by putting them on this pathway, you're actually going to produce more serious distress. And whilst we don't want these things to be politicised, I think it's odd that this is how the politics of this have fallen, and that you are now seeing Wes Streeting being accused of being a traitor to the LGBT community and so on, because of the fact that, as we know, also from the category, but before as well, the vast majority of the kids who are going through this service are same-sex attracted. It's something like 89% of the girls and 81 or 82% of the boys. And what tends to happen is that when these kids, because they're struggling to come to terms with their sexuality, they go through puberty and it all kind of works itself out.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is not only blocking off the means through which their distress might be eased, i.e., growing up and all the rest of it, but also you're effectively fixing gay children. So it's one of those things where how this became a reactionary cause to stop this thing from happening has never really made any sense to me.
I think what it just shows is the power of ideology. Mm-hmm. If an ideology has been inculcated, it's powerful. You will get people literally saying men can be women, women can be men. There is no such thing as men and women. When the reality is, it's a load of bollocks. Mm. We all know that to be false. But because this ideology has been pumped into every single place, you think to yourself, well, of course people behave like this because they're just following an ideology. Like you look at, you go into, there's a very prestigious scientific institute that I'm not going to name where there's a trans flag there. And you go, well, you either believe in science or you fucking don't.
Yeah.
Which one is it? You either believe men can be women, women can be men, or, men have willies, girls have foo-foos. What are you gonna pick?
And that's the debate solved right there. Yeah. Science that is settled.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like, it's a classic thing asking Keir Starmer, what is a woman? Mm-hmm. And he behaves like an autistic kid who's just had his train set taken away from him. Just go, come on. But no, thankfully, Tony Blair's told him what it is. So.
Yeah.
Unlikely voice of reason. Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back next Friday. If you hit subscribe and click the bell, you'll never miss an episode. And in the meantime, why not check out all of Spiked's other videos and podcasts on this channel? And for more Spiked content, find us at spiked-online.com.